Hi, I'm Etta Spencer. Today is a schmooze day, and so that means that we're going to have a very unpredictable conversation among people who don't know each other, but you better believe we will find some things in common because we all do. So I'm happy to welcome my friends. I know them all, but they don't know each other. In Orlando, Florida is Maria Puerta, who is a Venezuelan expatriate to the U.S. She taught for 18 years as a political scientist at a university in Venezuela before she immigrated to the U.S. some time ago, and has been teaching at a university in Puerto Rico. And in Virginia, near Washington, D.C., is Lester Kurtz, who's a professor of sociology at George Mason University. But most of the time in the last few years, he's been teaching. I didn't know that George Mason had a branch plant, but they do. They have a campus in Seoul, Korea, and he was spending most of his years teaching there until recently, but he's returned back to Fairfax and to the George Mason campus. He is, I think I met him because he edited a 3-volume encyclopedia on violence, peace, and conflicts, and he had me do a piece or two in it. And that was about 15 years ago. And I think you may have another edition out that I'm not in. But anyway, it's also no? Yes or no?
Yeah, there is a new edition, and the 3rd edition with 4 volumes just came out in February.
Good.
And I think I wasn't able to twist your arm to add something to that edition.
Well, it's all right. I'm not. My feelings are not hurt. Anyway, you've also written a book called The Warrior and the Pacifist, which, among other things, and I think I love that title in particular. William Geimer is a professor of law emeritus from Washington and Lee University, and he didn't like the American wars, so he, in protest, moved to Canada some time ago. He is very active in the Vancouver Island Peace and Disarmament Network, and he has a book that is called Canada, The Case for Staying Out of Other People's Wars. Let me see. Let me ask each of you in about one sentence what's on your mind lately, what topic you're thinking most about.
Sunday, I was asked about what is China going to do about Latin America after the Ukraine war. Mm-hmm. What is it there like is there an intention to reshape their policy towards Latin America?
Oh, Les Kurtz, what's on your mind?
I'm giving a paper on Saturday, this coming Saturday, at the sociology meetings in Los Angeles, and it's entitled Resistance and Peace Building, Wisdom from Asia, something like that. And so what I've been trying to do is to think about what we can learn from Asia, especially ancient Asia, but contemporary Asia as well, in terms of our sort of methods of resistance and ways of thinking about peace building. I've also been collaborating with Liu Cheng at Nanjing University, who has the UNESCO Peace Studies Chair in China.
Good. Okay, and Bill Geimer, what's on your mind?
I have to tell you that I have an Asia connection as well, because my outrage at listening to a biased NPR report with Tony Blinken blaming everybody else but the United States for violating the nuclear non-proliferation pact, and got me back to thinking it was actually a part of a class in the Peace School. We have the 77th anniversary commemoration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki coming up next week. And I have a particular interest there since I was in grade school in Yokohama only 4 years after the bombs dropped. So I would want to talk a bit about NATO and the West and Canada in nuclear weapons matters. And I have one general question and one specific question for the group and anyone tuned in.
Explain yourself as having been in grade school in Yokohama. That intrigues me.
My father was in the service, and of course, I was too. And he was part of the Army of Occupation.
So you went to an American school in Yokohama.
I did in grades 4.
But did you learn Japanese?
I still have. I have a very dear friend, Megumi Saunders, who has worked with me to establish the Peace School here, and she helps me expand the probably 150 word phrase vocabulary that I retained from my childhood.
We won't test you on it, but I'll tell you what. I think of all the conversations that we've mentioned, most of them are pretty specific, but Les sounds like he has a more general topic. So why don't we start with the general and then see what specifics it leads us into?
The further I go, the broader and deeper it gets.
Okay.
It's really it's so complicated. The other thing I forgot to mention is I actually spent a year in India, so I have South Asia as well, and actually almost everything I know about peace actually I borrowed from Gandhi, and so I've spent the last several decades after a year in India researching Gandhi's legacies, and so I've been trying to do a lot of thinking and reading about also various non-Western authors, and although our friend, Ned and I have a mutual friend. Some of you may also know Chaiwat Sata-Anand, who is from Thailand, and he came to speak to my course on non-Western social theory when I was teaching it in Korea. And he said he doesn't like the term Western. And he told the story about an ancient Chinese emperor who wanted to learn from the West. So he sent an ambassador to India to learn from the West. But there's still this problem of sort of Western domination, the Euro-American, well, even Canadian, right? Domination of how we think about all of these issues. Mm-hmm. And although I like to sometimes say that peace studies started in Africa because that's where Gandhi began his the non-violent campaigns, the Satyagraha campaigns at the end of the 19th century. But actually, I think they go back to China, with people like Lao Tzu and Mozi. Even Confucius, although I'm hesitant to give too much credit to Confucius because his more peaceful concepts have been captured by the emperors over the centuries, and they accentuate the hierarchical aspect of Confucius. But I think Lao Tzu's emphasis on the yin and yang and bringing the yin and yang together is a major part in this sort of longer term perspective. Liu Cheng, my Nanjing colleague, was here in town a few years ago, and we went to dinner with one of his former students who was an official at the embassy, the Chinese embassy here in Washington. And this was about a year or more into the Trump administration. And of course, conversation went to Trump, right? And so we were sitting there talking about Trump in this restaurant, and I'd asked a couple of questions of this Chinese official, and he said, "Well, we're very patient, and we think in terms of hundreds and thousands of years when we think about policy. And so, Trump's here, he'll go. American presidents come and go."
Mhm.
And it reminded me also of Elise Boulding saying we should live in a 200-year present, 100 years before and 100 years from now, that's our era. So maybe part of what we have to learn about all of these hot button contemporary issues like Pelosi's trip to China is that these are like small blips on a very long arc of history, right?
Mhm.
Which Obama quoting King said the long arc of history bends toward justice. So maybe it's that longer perspective of this balancing of yin and yang.
Well, do you think that's really true, though? I mean, these people in China must be responding to very quick changes in situations. I mean, they too have to cope with, what's going on in Ukraine. They too have to cope with the changing economy, with a whole bunch of new things. I just read something this morning. What surprised me, they have a new rail freight train line that goes all over China and goes right to all over straight to Europe, and they're sending huge amounts of cargo back and forth. Solar panels go to Europe, and they bring French wine back. And this has been going on for a number of months, and apparently it's a big deal. You can reduce the amount of time it takes to get cargo from China to Europe by many days, a month less, time. So now that they have to be on their toes too. They can't just be waiting 100 years to see what's going to happen. I don't think. And I bet you even she is a little nervous because he's going to come up, try to get to be president again and get his term extended. And looks like he's got some problems he hadn't counted on.
Well, that's a yin yang again, isn't it? The short term immediate attention and the long term perspective, and this incredible development projects where China is moving into every corner, and making some of the same mistakes that Europeans and Americans have done. In trying to get natural resources and cheap labor from the rest of the world, but they call it the Belt and Road, right? It's the Silk Road all over again.
Well, is that rail line part of the Belt and Road or something? Because the first time I heard of it was today. This freight system railway.
They're also building a highway. They're building a highway from Dar es Salaam to Kinshasa too. I mean, it's just amazing. They have their hands everywhere.
But when they say Belt and Road, is it just the highway, or do they count the trains and other things?
I think it's everything.
Okay.
They're even building airports.
Okay.
Yeah, they're building airports, seaports, railways. I mean, it's brilliant, as an empire building strategy, and they're trying to avoid military conquest, and they don't meddle in people's affairs like the West. They don't try to get people to be democratic or pro human rights or anything like that. So they're having a lot.
They sure don't. I mean, you sound like that's okay with you. It's not okay with me.
No, well, of course not. Of course not. I mean, I was being facetious.
Maria.
But that's true. Right?
Yeah. Well, okay. I don't get an argument with you about that. Maria, I tell you what you're concerned about China and its influence in South America or Latin America. I don't know anything about that, and I haven't ever thought about it. What's new and different about that?
So last year, I have a friend who is a researcher in the Alfred Hirschman Center for Democracy. And she is the editorial coordinator of it's like a blog embedded in the El País, which is a Spanish newspaper. She runs that, and it's a little bit of, well, she's in Geneva. The newspaper is in Spain, so she's Argentinian. So it's kind of a very global kind of experience. And I usually write for her things about Venezuela, and she wanted me to talk for her podcast about China's white paper about Chinese democracy.
Mm-hmm.
She knows I write about democracy. That's my thing. And she wanted me to reflect on that democracy made in China. So I read the white paper. I read a couple of other things, and I thought, well, this is just the response to democracy's, failures, weaknesses, and the whole backsliding approach is giving not just China, but Russia, other liberal forces, Hungary, they're giving them an opportunity. So I had that experience with her, and people from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Uruguay reached out, and they wanted me to write a series of 4 pieces about China. So I started with the white paper again, and then I wrote about Chinese pragmatism. And the last one that was published yesterday was about China and Russia. And the concern is we're writing at the think tank that I work with, we're writing about Russia's and China meddling in Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that surprises me is China stopped investing in Venezuela, but for other reasons. They're still very strong in terms of funding in Latin America, but they have kind of been a little bit more cautious, and they're turning, not now, they've been in Africa for more than a decade, but they're kind of trying to strengthen their game in Africa in terms of, not just Belt Road Initiative, a lot of other things. They want to, that's what they've tried to do in Latin America. They're trying to cover the void left from other big, strong countries like the US, the European Union. So Russia less measure because they can't compete in terms of funding. But China is kind of stepping up their game in not just Latin America.
What countries and what? I mean, it seems to me that in Latin America, there are some countries that are more going right, and some more to the left. I mean, Chile has just brought in a somewhat left-leaning government, for example, and not all countries have the same orientation. Where is there leverage, or where is there a place for China to exploit some better connections with the government? In which countries?
Well, it's really not ideological because they have investments in Brazil. Bolsonaro is not a leftist; it's the total opposite. Mm-hmm. And also, I've seen some moves made in El Salvador, and Bukele is not really a leftist. So it's not really fully ideological. It's more on the illiberal perspective. So they say it clearly that democracy is something that you can't just associate with one side, because they understand, and they share that with Russia, that they have a different definition of what they understand democracy is. It's not connected to human rights or transparency in voting or anything like that, but it's just the white paper makes it very clear. It's about giving people what they want to be, happy or something like that.
Mhm. Okay.
I remember my wife was born in Maracaibo, and I thought back many, many years when I went down twice to Nicaragua in the middle of the Contra War. And I was by no means, I was there for peace. I was not there to be a disciple of the Sandinistas, but I did see one party democracy at work. And I will say that. And it was grounded on the last thing Maria said. What do the people need, and how many of them can we assemble in these various to tell us what they need? Now, like every venture on the left and the right, human failings poison it, and it goes off the rail. But we don't need Democrats and Republicans and multi-parties in order to have democracy, in my view.
I don't know if the answer is one party, two parties, or a bunch of parties. What I do think is the problem is, how can you build a democracy with a system that does not foster individual and collective rights? Like, I know what it is to be in a system that you have multiple parties, but democracy is rooted in free and fair elections, the right to participate, the right to choose who you want to represent you. But if you have only one choice, which is not really making a choice, it's just, this is what you got, and you have to vote for it, or else you won't have anything. I think that's a problem. Of course, with the Chinese system, you do have the Communist Party controlling everything, and they have some more kind of regional parties, the other 7, 8 parties, but they are kind of satellites. So they are all working towards what the Chinese Communist Party considers to be. And what I get from not just the white paper about democracy, but the previous one in November. There was one in December and there was one in November. That's pretty much what I think is happening. Not just, I'm not talking about China now, I'm just talking about democracy in general. There's this sort of attitude of break it all, but I don't see the other part of it, which is how you rebuild. And I think trust is gone in terms of not just political parties or Congress or the presidency. Look at the numbers here in the US, and people don't trust anything, not the Supreme Court, not media. They don't have trust in institutions. And that's what I saw in Venezuela. That's how democracy was lost. It was a flawed democracy. There's no perfect democracy. But I think when you have no trust in institutions, who do you turn to? That's my concern, not just about Latin America. Now I'm thinking about this country where I live, where I came. And I don't have any other place to go. So it really concerns me what's going on here.
You should think about Canada. I could see what was happening in the United States years ago. Contact me, but I do want to, if I could, with the time that we have. There is another country in Asia. China to me is playing the same colonial imperialist game that what is known as the West is playing, and the Russians are playing, and that's the way. But given that, there is one country that's not at the moment playing the game, and I go back to Japan, and a very dangerous man just recently died, Shinzo Abe. And my condolences to his family. But I hope that his effort to amend or reinterpret or clarify the Constitution of Japan that imposed upon it the only real gift we gave Japan when I was there. MacArthur was there, a perfectly terrible individual, by the way, but that they have an anti-war constitution. And they have gotten by for decades, and they don't need anybody's protection, and they don't need anybody's nuclear weapons in order to keep that going. If the world of nuclear weapons holders, including Israel, is playing this game and talking about nuclear deterrence, someone please tell me why Iran should not have a nuclear weapon.
The U.S. has no moral high ground in anything about nuclear weapons, and that structure that was set up in 1945 has never been dismantled. It's been expanded, but the U.S. continues to point the finger at other countries. Now, I don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons either.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to have nuclear weapons. And talk about benign indifference. I love the concept, but that's a great idea. Benign indifference. It kind of reminds me. There's a concept by Irving Goffman. It's called studied inattention. And it's sort of like, you pretend like you're not paying attention, but the inattention is deliberate. I mean, it's studied. And the benign indifference is it's not real indifference. It's like a strategic effort to appear indifferent, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, the elephant in the room.
Yeah. I mean, this is South Korea's interesting in with its incredible economy, but it has to import a lot of things. Because it's filled with mountains. And I think North Korea is much the same. So South Korea even has trouble feeding 50 million people, half of whom live in Seoul, in the Seoul area.
50 million South Koreans?
Yeah, 50 million. 25 million live in the Seoul metropolitan area.
Oh.
And they live in among the mountains, right? Because the country is covered with mountains. And so the cities are built, even Seoul's built around, in the valleys. And they don't have a lot of arable land, so they have to import things, but they export, semiconductors and cars and high technology. That's how they, manage to
Well,
survive.
what in terms of their relationships with their neighbors? Do they have strong feelings about Taiwan, the issue of Taiwan versus China, or is it a matter of benign indifference?
Yeah, I think benign indifference and studied inattention, maybe. I'm not an expert on Korean politics, so I can't speak with any authority on that. But I had the sense that they're all, the Koreans are always kind of walking a tightrope, right? Because they don't want to. They also want to trade with China, and there's this very complicated relationship with Japan, because there's an anti-Japanese, a residue from brutal Japanese colonialism in Korea, and of course the economic competition. Right?
I've heard that the Japanese have kind of a racist disdain for Koreans.
I don't know whether that is currently the situation or to what degree. It certainly was in the past, but not only was the Japanese colonial occupation harsh, but after the war, the Americans installed a lot of the Japanese to run things in Korea, believe it or not, engendering even more hostility. It's what little I know is pretty much confined to that period, and the division of the country is absolutely arbitrary. Dean Rusk was one of the people who later ruined a lot of things for Vietnam, was one of the people who drew the line at the 38th parallel and said, okay, this is a country now. Everything south of here is a country and we run it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Les, you referred to a complicated relationship between Korea and Japan. Can you elaborate?
Of course, Japan is one of the world's largest economies. And in a way, Korea has tried to kind of emulate them.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an intense economic competition, right?
Oh.
But underneath, people don't. I did not hear. Well, I was in kind of a bubble, academic bubble when I was there. I did not interact a lot with everyday Koreans. I never learned the language, and we lived on the university campus out in this new city that was created by a landfill on the coast, and so we were kind of isolated from a lot of the country. But I still heard there, and from my students, there's this kind of undertone of anti-Japanese sentiment that's left over from the occupation. Now, there's a little bit of anti-American sentiment that's similar, because the Americans were also very brutal in their occupation of South Korea. South Korea was kind of a colony of the U.S. for a while after this demarcation that Bill was talking about, and the creation of the two nations there. Actually, I was on a dissertation committee for a Korean student in New Zealand who his doctoral dissertation was on the reconciliation process in South Korea, that was actually trying to go back and look at sort of grievances of South Koreans who were terrorized by the South Korean dictatorship that was also something of an American puppet, and so a lot of those grievances, people who were murdered, who were imprisoned, anyone with the faintest opposition to the South Korean regime was subject to a lot of repression, and that I mean those people are still alive. Again, I'm not an expert, but I have the sense that the early South Korean government, before the democratic uprisings, was kind of a South Korean puppet, an American puppet government. And they, what happened was that there was this, affinity between the South Korean economic elites who were building this incredible, economic revolution. They brought in German auto experts to help build cars that they could export, and they got a lot of American subsidies, I think, for their economic and infrastructure development, all that sort of thing. But until the democratic revolutions in South Korea, there was this really close relationship. Again, I don't know the details between Americans and the South Korean government, and a lot of atrocities. And that's what this Truth and Reconciliation process was trying to uncover, some of those things still left over from the dictatorship.
Do you have any sense? I mean, the couple of governments ago, it seemed to me that the guy, I can't remember names, but the South Korean leader was really trying to play nice with North Korea and promote some sort of rapprochement or reconciliation.
Well, President President Moon, the immediate recent president, he was president while I was there. He was a human rights lawyer. Who was elected as part of the kind of reform movement, right? And he really opened up to the North Koreans. He tried to develop, progress the relationship between the two countries. And it looked like, actually, I went to a wonderful meeting in Tokyo that the Toda Foundation sponsored several years ago. And they gathered together the top North Korea people from China, from South Korea, from the European Union, Japan, and Obama's North Korea point person. And actually there was this moment of like real optimism. Now I'm trying to remember what year this was. It was pre-COVID, right? So just pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was.
But there was a the Congress of the North Korean Party, Communist Party, and Kim Jong-un made a speech that there had been a parallel path of military development and economic development, and that they had completed the military development. Now they were going to focus on the economy. Well, the person from the Chinese foreign ministry said this speech was like Deng Xiaoping's transformation of the Chinese economy and opening it up, to the world's economy. And he anticipated this tremendous shift in North Korea as North Korea tried to emphasize its economic development rather than military development. But it all, I had a great piece that I never got published, and I'm glad I didn't publish it since it ended up being all wrong, right? Because none of this happened.
None of it came to fruition, but it sounded good for how long? 5 minutes?
Oh,
Well, no, for a few months. I think President Moon from South Korea was building on that, and actually his North Korea his point person on North Korea came and talked to my class after that, and he was very optimistic about making progress with North Korea.
Meta, I think if we think about it, these internal truth and reconciliation efforts, I did not know about the one in Korea, but they're not uncommon. I mean, we have, when a repressive government changes, South Africa, I believe Chile, Argentina, the Pinochet, certainly, then it's not uncommon to have this kind of reckoning, where you can't really heal until you get the truth out. And so I did not know about the one in Korea, but it's no great surprise to me, and I'm glad to hear it. That was from the time of the end of the war and the U.S. occupation until somewhere in the early 80s. They had this repressive government in South Korea, and only then did it change over to what we tend to see today.
Well, then one other thing I wanted to mention that this conversation was reminding me of. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, you're not.
Well, a quick story. There's a museum in Nanjing. It's called the Nanjing. It was originally called the Nanjing Massacre Museum. And when the Japanese invaded Nanjing, they massacred thousands and thousands of people. And there's this huge museum commemorating that massacre. Well, Liu Cheng, who's the UNESCO Peace Studies Chair in China, the only UNESCO Peace Studies Chair in China, he managed to shift the message of that museum from anti-Japanese to anti-war. And it's beautiful. It's become the museum of the Nanjing Massacre and World Peace. And it's a beautiful reframing. And we went there. Yu Cheng invited me, and my wife and I went to the museum during a peace studies conference in Nanjing, and we had delegates from Japan, South Korea, and China, who all went together to that museum for a tour. And they, of course, were emphasizing the anti-war aspect of it for that audience. But it was interesting to walk around the museum and to see these atrocities of war with a group of Japanese. Of course, they were peace studies people, so they were, they were sorry for what the Japanese had done in that situation as well.
Well, that's
like
an
a- it was like
interesting
a-
question, though. You raise a point that, I think there is something to be said that there's no healing until there's really remorse and recognition of culpability, that this needs to happen before there can be real reconciliation. And
Yeah.
people who want to ignore, well, that's where your benign indifference
neglect.
is immoral. We really have to keep each other accountable for our misdeeds. And I think you cannot go around forgiving people too lightly unless you have some evidence that they understand what they've done wrong. That's my opinion. I've changed very strong feeling now that too simple a practice of forgiveness is really harmful, because we do really need accountability. And my sense is that the Japanese have not, as a society, recognized or really understood the magnitude of the treatment of Nanking. It was called the Rape of Nanking, or I guess you say Nanjing now, but.
Yeah.
They really did horrible atrocities, and that needs to be held there until they actually acknowledge it. And so the idea of translating it into, well, we're opposed to war, as if equally, everybody in a war is equally bad. Well, if you're a victim, if you were some child in Nanking being murdered, you're not exactly. You're in a war, but you're not culpable in the same way as the person who's doing the atrocities. Sorry, but I have
Shall your position extend, generally? Places like Dresden, for example? Hiroshima?
Yeah.
Whom are you asking?
I'm asking you whether the United States and the UK and what Lester calls the Western countries
Absolutely
need to take accountability for the millions of civilians that they've killed.
Absolutely.
The Pope recently apologized for the church's involvement in
Residential schools.
the residential schools for indigenous people in America. And I sent out a notice of that to a commission that I'm co-chair of. And I said, this is a good step. And I got a response from a Native American member of our commission. And he said, yeah, good step. But what we want is a papal renunciation of the doctrine of discovery.
Yeah.
That the entire sort of framework of this colonial mentality and the idea that whoever it is, whether it's the West or the Japanese or Americans or whomever, who is engaged in this kind of military conquest, needs to own up and stop doing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not just that they need to be own up, because a lot of countries are not going to do it. Very few societies do. Japan is not. Germany did. That was almost unique. The Russians have never really apologized or felt even guilty about what happened under Stalin. In fact, Stalin is still the most popular person in Russian history. If you ask people's opinion, he's fine with them. So, but I think it's not just personal psychological and social, recognition, but it also has to be, there has to be a new business of upholding and enforcing international law, that people need to be brought to court and either punished or found innocent for their misdeeds, for their war crimes, and so on. So I think what we have to do is actually work toward a new government, global governance that is capable of enforcing international law, and not only enforcing it, but also have mechanisms for legitimately creating an international law, so that we know what the laws are. Because lots of times they don't even make it clear what the law is. I mean, for example, if during the time that the Russians were sending troops into Donetsk and Luhansk provinces, and there should have been UN peacekeepers who've gone in and said, here, this is against the law, you stay out of here, and we're here to protect people and not allow this to happen. We should have that. And we have to have some real government that is able to make legitimate laws that are recognized globally and enforce them. So there you go. And truth and reconciliation, that's great, but that's all very voluntary, And if people don't want to apologize, what do? Well, you have to live with them, and it doesn't work by and large.
Well, these are the yin and yang of these atrocities, right? Do you take them to court and punish them and execute them, or do you have some kind of reconciliation process? And so far, neither of them has worked with all of these big issues, have they? But there has to be something. There has to be some way. That's our job. That's our job, right?
If I could ask, I want to ask Maria, because we've been dominating here, I think. There is a question raised by this doctrine of discovery issue that is one of the good things that's come out of the Pope's visit. And the doctrine has very real legal consequences, because it is unlike the US. There are, at least in Canada, there are negotiations that have been going on for years. There are that are seeking to resolve treaty rights and status for Indigenous peoples in Canada. And we could spend a whole hour going into the flaws of that process, but it's ongoing anyway. And the doctrine of discovery is a legal obstacle to that kind of real on the ground, money in the pocket, political power reconciliation. And I have my interest and my experience, as I said, has only been in Central America. But I'm asking Maria, do they have those kinds of negotiations or attempts at practical reconciliation going on with Indigenous peoples in Latin America?
I don't think so. I believe in Brazil, there's not at the level of reconciliation, because what I see from my experience with Venezuela, Indigenous people have been abused historically, and the effort in wiping their heritage, history, tradition, culture has forced many of them to integrate, leaving behind not just who they are, but their land, which is the most important part of it. With what happened in Venezuela, I don't know, I'm not sure, I'm not an expert. I think that has been happening with many of these people. In Venezuela right now, since the oil industry collapsed, there has been, and of course, after that, the sanctions kind of helped. They are turning into mining they had for a while, but since the crisis worsened, then they turned to mining, and mining has brought a lot of bad actors into that industry activity. So you have on the one side all the people involved in these activities. Some are illicit, irregular. And then you have that causing huge harm to the environment, but also affecting the lives of these people there. Some of them are complaining not only about the destruction of the ecosystem, but their lives, their livelihoods. That's happening in Venezuela in several parts. I don't know. There's nothing going on in terms of correcting the wrong because the government is involved in it and the military is involved in it. There's a lot of criticism directed to them, but there's also been some punishment. Some of these indigenous leaders have been killed, murdered, tortured. So reconciliation, at least in my experience in Venezuela, I haven't seen anything. The total opposite. These people have complained about mistreatment, but we know because human rights groups have been warning that they are going after them. So I don't think that's the case. I know in Brazil there was another discussion because it had to do with the Amazonia and all this, but I'm not familiar with it, so I wouldn't want to, try to even attempt to explain it. But in the case of Venezuela, no, nothing. There's and this is something that happened during democracy, that indigenous people were not recognized or respected. And with this government, there's no change.
I would add that some of those bad actors in mining are Canadian. When my wife and I sit down and figure money, we have a whole list of companies that we don't want to put any money in.
Canada has the largest mining industry, I think, in the world. I think Canadian mining is really huge everywhere. So it's not surprising that they're the bad guys. If there are any good guys, they're probably represented there too, but I don't know how many good guys there are in the mining business.
Well, we're benignly indifferent to that. We don't wish them any harm down there. We hope they do well.
Well, we've covered the waterfront, folks. It's time to quit. Okay. Thank you all. It's been lovely.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank
you. Nice meeting you all.
Enjoy.
Bye. Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week and sometimes more. This is episode number 485. You can watch these or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post transcripts there. Look around there because we have conversations there about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your thoughts about the show. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can buy a single copy or subscribe for $20 Canadian per year through Pressreader. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see the cover of the current issue and buttons to click to subscribe.